So, heavyweights have always had some design problems. In order for them to feel fair, their risk-reward tends to not be able to match the weaknesses they face due to lack of mobility, neutral options, and defense. And since they're a bigger target, a lot of characters are able to exploit their hitboxes in ways they can't on anybody else. So, when we look at a tier list for Strive, we should notice... Okay, how did this happen? It's no secret to anyone who's played Guilty Gear Strive for a long time that heavyweights have had long-term competitive success throughout the game's lifespan, which is highly untypical for the fighting game genre. Heavyweights have such a bad reputation, most people's first assumption when they see a big hulking behemoth of a character is to write them off as garbage. And the worst part is, they're right more often than they have any right to be. However, as mentioned, Strive has been a noticeable exception to this trend, as numerous heavyweight characters have found high amounts of success in competitive play. Looking back at that mock tier list for a second, let's find every heavyweight on there. The first obvious standout is Gold Lewis, followed by Nagoriyuki in the upper echelon of characters. Potemkin is doing great for himself too, and only Bedman is left to struggle around the lower end of the tier list. That being said, I also think Strive has more characters that could reasonably be classified as heavies that are also performing quite well. We'll call the groups of characters we just talked about heavyweights, or true heavyweights, and we'll call this next group of characters mid to heavyweights. These characters have a lot of the same defining characteristics as your typical true heavy, such as slightly laggier attacks, slower movement, and high HP and damage to counterbalance it. Looking at these characters, we immediately notice Leo up at the top too, with Anji not too far behind. Abba, while relatively new, is doing extremely well for herself and likely falls in pretty good standing, once again leaving one straggler, Johnny, to sulk in the lower tiers. So out of our 8 heavyweights, only 2 of them are quote-unquote low tier, leaving a staggering 75% of the big boys in the middle to upper half of the roster. So, why? Why are heavyweights doing so good? Is it just luck, or is there something about Strive as a game and the design directions taken with each individual character that allows them to prosper like they do? That's what I want to look into in this video. Before we do that though, we're going to have to talk about why heavyweights are traditionally weak in the first place. I actually originally had an entire script for a video titled The Problem with Heavyweights that ultimately got scrapped, so I'll paraphrase the points I make in that little piece of gone but not forgotten content. Essentially, heavyweights are a polarizing archetype. The power fantasy from playing a heavy is feeling like a walking wall of destruction, and knowing you can blow your opponent up for a single misstep, striking fear into their hearts for every decision they choose and forcing them to play into your hand. This is an inherently toxic power fantasy to balance around, as if you patch the typical weaknesses up of a heavyweight such as slow movement and attacks, you not only slightly lose the power fantasy, but they begin to feel incredibly frustrating to fight against. Forcing high damage output for mistakes that are barely even mistakes in the first place is incredibly frustrating, and is the reason why devs tend to make heavyweights weak either unintentionally or otherwise. If they could poke you with a jab from mid-screen and nuke your life bar, you'd probably see hordes of angry gamers storm the company headquarters. And that's why this power fantasy is usually only accessible through extremely risky tools like a high-powered command grab or extremely disadvantageous attack after the heavy has already won a smaller interaction. And while this certainly makes them feel less frustrating to play against, and in a lot of cases actually benefits the power fantasy of crushing your opponent with fear, can end up slotting heavies in an awkward spot where they're never really allowed to be good. So that raises the question, what does Strive do differently? There are obviously other games with strong heavyweights, but the consistent success of the archetype here is pretty unprecedented. In order to answer that, we'll need to look at each character one by one and see which pillars of traditional heavyweight design they hold up, and which ones they break down. This is gonna be a lot, so get your comically large popcorn bucket, get your Hulk serum, because we're going to deep dive into what makes Strive's heavyweights succeed. I think the most interesting place to start would be with everyone's favorite blood-sucking samurai, Nagoriyuki. Now, Nago is a standout even amongst Strive heavies, as he's been a top tier for the entirety of the game, with his worst standings only ever being slightly outside of the top 5. And what's most impressive about him is that he's got traditional heavyweight weaknesses. He has no dash, no double jump, and no meterless reversal, and yet he remains one of the most popular characters in the entire game. How did they do that? Well, it's all related to his blood meter. Nagoriyuki has a gauge at the bottom corner of his screen that fills up when he uses most of his special moves. All of these specials are massively powerful, giving him an almost full screen low attack to skip approaching, a heavy's general most consistent struggle, a really fast command dash, a powerful priority projectile, and a dominant combo/mix-up tool with his DP that sports an overhead follow-up. All of this is incredibly overwhelming, but it's tied to Nagoriyuki's blood gauge to balance him out. When Nago uses one of these specials, the bar fills. Fill too much and you enter Blood Rage and lose the round. I didn't originally plan to do this, but I'm just gonna let this clip play to show you how bad Blood Rage really is. This means the Nagoriyuki player has to ration how often they use these powerful attacks and pick when to best spin blood on a powerful attack, or lay back and struggle through the slow-paced neutral the old-fashioned way. This presents a unique weakness that makes Nagoriyuki a little more engaging for the opponent to play around too. If you can get him to use his powerful blood specials and then escape his grasp, he's left at high blood and forced to fight you without his most powerful tools. This might sound unfun for the Nago player, but with each blood level his normals get a power-up, evening the playing field as he creeps closer to Blood Rage, which helps him from feeling too swingy when the things don't work out as planned with the specials. This resource-based mechanic allows Nago to simultaneously uphold and break the pillars of traditional heavyweight design while still maintaining the power fantasy the archetype represents. Nago is allowed to get big combos off his light attacks because it costs him his unique resource. He's allowed to use fast approach tools because if they don't work, he won't get to use them again without a serious struggle first. But what about a character closer to a more traditional heavyweight? One that doesn't have a unique resource and is simply pure, unadulterated power. For that, we need to talk about Guilty Gear's de facto big body grappler, Potemkin. Now, Potemkin admittedly hasn't always been in the greatest place. He was insanely broken during the beta test for the game, as his tools were largely unpunishable and better all around. But after nerfs between said beta and launch, he's found himself sitting at the very bottom of most tier lists. That being said, in recent years he's only gotten better, and nowadays he's proud to call himself at the very least a mid-tier, and has achieved victories at more than one large-scale event. Potemkin is absolutely just as big and slow, if not more big and more slow than your traditional heavyweight. He can't dash and double jump just like Nagoriyuki, but lacks any fast neutral skips, and doesn't have the ability to combo effectively off of a majority of his attacks without meter or counter. So, how is Pod able to be strong? Well, one, his base kit is actually fairly competent at posing a consistent threat no matter how disadvantaged he may be. Pod has 3 armored special moves that he can threaten to stop characters from keeping him out for free, with Hammerfall being a high-risk, high-reward ground approach, Heat Tackle being a high-risk, high-reward air version, and Slidehead being a strong neutral check to force the opponent to jump or backdash, lest they get knocked down from full screen and allow Pod to take valuable screen space. Potemkin's pokes are low reward, but they're certainly not weak. His 2S, 5H, and 2D are quite large, and combined with Mega Fist, a mid-crushing hop that can punish anyone trying to counterpoke at him, Potemkin can hold his own in neutral despite these weaknesses. After Pod gets his knockdown, he has a pretty unique and very powerful tool that helps him avoid the weaknesses that traditional big body grapplers face here too. As mentioned, in order for a high-powered command throw to feel fair, the opponent needs to be able to feel rewarded for escaping it, and this is certainly the case for Pod, as he gets punished anytime this attack is evaded with a jump or backdash. That being said, Pod doesn't actually immediately force his strike throw after he gets his knockdown. Potemkin instead uses Garuda Impact, a move that ensures that the strike throw the opponent is going to take will be completely unavoidable. Garuda Impact is a disjointed, plus on-block guard crush with high active frames. This means that if Potemkin sets it up on a meaty, it will be guaranteed plus enough for him to use it a second time. And if the opponent attempts to escape with a jump, backdash, or DP, they will get hit by the extended active frames of the attack or be forced into a disadvantageous clash scenario against him. The fact that this guard crushes is also important, as it locks the opponent out of their YRC, a very important defensive tool that could otherwise completely negate Potemkin's turn should he opt for this move. This guard crush also deals large chip damage on block, so even if Potemkin ends up being wrong on his guess, if he goes for strike instead of throw, he's still dealing damage to the opponent, pushing them to the corner and returning to mid-range scot-free. You might have also noticed that a lot of Potemkin's tools have a strange burst in momentum before their activation, and this is actually a special technique that benefits Potemkin's ability to get in and stay in without feeling unfair to the opponent. This technique is known as a Kara cancel. What Potemkin is actually doing here is starting up his 6K, a forward advancing shoulder check, and then immediately canceling its startup into a special move, granting Pot the momentum from 6K and only delaying the attack startup by a couple frames max. This does a lot for Pot, as the strategy of simply using faultless defense to push him away from his grab range becomes significantly less effective, and pots who are able to clear this execution barrier can threaten powerful options such as re-staggers with Garuda in offensive situations, long-range neutral attacks with Mega Fist, and round-start command grabs. This executional requirement seems arbitrary, as this technique actually isn't easy, but I think it's important to preserve for pot to still feel fair. At a lower level of gameplay, say floors 1 to 8 or so, most Potemkins won't be able to do these Kara cancels most or all of the time. At a skill level where players are making 10 times the mistakes of higher skilled players, characters who completely rely on punishing mistakes heavily tend to cause a split between the community. Mid to low level players become incredibly frustrated and lost fighting them, whereas high level players write them off entirely for not being able to succeed without relying on the opponent playing poorly. These Kara cancels boost Pot's ability to perform independent of his opponent's mistakes at a high level, while also not interfering with the risk-reward balance at a lower level. So while it might be frustrating for a beginner player to know that they have to learn this advanced technique if they want to rise up the ranks, I think it serves an important role in balancing the character. Additionally, while lacking a reversal, just like expected for his archetype, Pot does have a strong defensive option that should be noted in back Mega Fist. This is the inverse of his forward leaping punch attack, but it's fundamentally different in a few key ways. First, it doesn't knock down. Second, it's plus on block. Combine that with the already tricky to deal with fast high profile of the old punishable on block Mega Fist, and you get a deadly defensive threat to deal with when Potemkin is cornered. In some cases, this can even be better than having a DP, as Potemkin is quite hard to punish for using this technique, as it requires you to interrupt its startup rather than making it whiff or punish it on block, as if you simply wait to block it, Potemkin's got you right in his strike throw and can snatch you with a Kara Pot Buster for the round. The final contributing factor to Pot's success would be that I lied to you. That's right, Adventure is a liar. I told you Pot doesn't have any fast neutral approaches, but I lied. What I really meant to say is that he doesn't have any fast, meterless approach options. With resources, he's got a few very powerful options he can threaten that he has to work for to gain, but feel incredibly powerful to use. With 50 meter, Pot can set up Gigantor Kai, an Aegis-like super that sends a window of mass destruction slowly across the screen. Pot can follow behind this attack to guarantee at least one turn on the attack per round, albeit without any resources left to spare. He can also use this 50 meter on Hammerfall RC, using his armored approach tool to get close to the opponent, but canceling it into either plus on block strike pressure or his Potemkin Buster once he secures positional advantage. Pot and the other true heavies also have one more approach option that boosts their power level, but I've refrained from mentioning it until now, as it's the first thing so far I actually have more of a negative outlook on. The tool I'm referring to is White Wild Assault. White Wild Assault, or WWA for long actually, is a forward advancing strike with quick activation and strike invulnerability from the 9th frame onwards. Not only that, but it's also highly advantageous on block and a guard crush, meaning White Wild Assault is a deadly approach option when used effectively. However, the problem lies with its implementation. The cost of 50 burst to activate this attack isn't balanced effectively when compared to the powerful win conditions of these heavyweight characters. And its outrageous speed and rage make it impossible for a staggering majority of the cast to keep it in check. This means that big bodies like Pot, Nago, Goldlewis, and Bedman can use White Wild Assault as a 2-stock neutral demolisher that completely sidelines both the power fantasy of playing a heavyweight and the traditional weaknesses that makes their win condition feel so rewarding. Most players strongly dislike this mechanic, as it destroys one of the main pillars heavyweight design is balanced upon, and makes them incredibly frustrating and terrifying to challenge in parts of the screen that should be favored for the other player. Even heavy players themselves have voiced concerns over this mechanic, as with the power of this attack comes a negative impact on this power fantasy that makes them feel less rewarding to play. If my character is so big and slow he can't even dash, double jump, air dash, or even swing his attacks quickly, why can he instant transmission right up into my opponent's face and nullify the gratification I feel working my way in and pulverizing my opponent? While this mechanic is certainly a little toxic and actually has been directly addressed by the devs as a problem they're working towards fixing, I feel an absolute need to mention it as a reason why heavies are as successful as they are right now, because the power of White Wild Assault shouldn't be understated. Speaking of system mechanics, I'd also like to pose some theories about Strive's overall game design that benefits heavyweights before we look at our next character. Compared to other Guilty Gear games, I'd like to point out a few key things that may enable a big body environment to exist in Strive and not before it. First of all, the screen size. GG Strive has had a significantly reduced overall screen size from corner to corner in both stage size and the camera distance from the players. This encourages a more intimate spacing in neutral game and reduces the impact of fast movement, as there's less of the screen to dart around. Even better is that with the smaller screen size, the large attacks from large characters dominate a higher percentage of the screen's real estate, making their effective threat range higher in terms of screen coverage. This works out beautifully for heavies, who have always hated slowly walking in on zoners, or trying to pin down fast opponents who can just fly over their heads and chip away at their life bar. Another change that benefits heavies is the reduction of the Gatling system. Characters have less chain options from their normals, so heavies stand out less when they aren't able to convert effectively off their pokes, as everyone's conversions off a tool like 5P, max range 5H, or other attack are reduced as well. Finally, movement in general has been slowed down. And while this is also true for these heavies, just look at Pot's Hammerfall and Hammerfall Break for an example, this shallower curve for range of movement speed helps heavies not feel completely blown out of the water by characters who aren't as slow as them. All of this creates an environment in which slower, larger characters are allowed to thrive in ways that they would otherwise be too threatened to do so, and our next character more than benefits from this heavyweight-friendly design philosophy. Gold Lewis was the first DLC character for Strive, and is maybe the most controversial heavyweight in the game. The first thing you have to know about Gold Lewis is that he's strong. Really strong. You'll struggle to find a tier list from a strong player that places him outside of the top 3, and while he's had his stints in the mid-tier from time to time, this isn't his first time at the head of the pack, and it certainly won't be his last. Gold Lewis is maybe the most polarized heavyweight out of all of them, not having anything to his name such as the title of Grappler or a blood gauge to manage, and simply relying on pure, unadulterated, earth-shattering offense. His kit centralizes around his high damage, access to powerful looping plus frames, mix-ups, neutral skips, and basically anything that lowers your life bar. He is a traditional heavy, which means he lacks mobility, but he actually can run an air dash, albeit slowly. The unique movement difference Gold Lewis has from other characters is his jump arc. Gold Lewis has the lowest jump arc in the game, and it's not even close, barely even going over most mid-attacks. You might think this is bad, and it is in certain cases, as it accentuates his issues on defense, but in neutral, this is actually a disgustingly powerful tool. Being able to jump so low means his jump-ins are completely unreactable, and gives him a very fast, high-profile option similar to Potemkin's Mega Fist with infinitely higher reward. Due to Gold Lewis's heavy offensive focus, he's also allowed to convert into knockdowns off all his normals using 684 BT. If you somehow don't already know about this infamous special move, allow me to explain. Behemoth Typhoon is a unique special that is inputtable with a half circle in any direction. The direction you input changes the properties of the attack, and forms the core of Gold Lewis's offense. Almost all of the BTs are plus, and he can choose from a variety of lows, overheads, combo enders, resets, and more. Additionally, they deal heavy chip damage on block, deny YRC and mashouts with Guard Crush state, and have extremely low pushback even when FD, letting Gold Lewis stay in once he gets in extremely easily. This style of offense ensures Gold Lewis deals damage to you once he gets in, a far cry from the feast or famine style of grapplers. If Gold Lewis can get in range for a BT, you're either giving him all of your precious meter, or a significant portion of your life, even assuming the entire time you don't get hit by any overheads, lows, or throws. This is incredibly powerful, and Gold Lewis probably has the most powerful offense in the game because of it, which in turn makes him definitively the biggest abuser of White Wildness in the game. Gold Lewis is so incredibly strong because while it's true that his traditional grounded buttons are a bit weaker than average, and his defense is quite weak too, he has a multitude of ways to skip right to his turn or force you to guess in neutral to stop him from getting in for free. While his normals aren't insane, he does have some standout buttons to accentuate this neutral skipping playstyle. His 5k goes under most lows and scores him a knockdown. His Far Slash is a solid whiff punisher for opponents who are whiffing a 6p hoping to stuff a JD jump in. And his 2p is the only plus on block jab in the game, meaning you can't just sit and wait for him to do something minus. On top of this, the developers also decided to give Gold Lewis the bullshit bar, otherwise known as the security gauge. This meter locks two of Gold Lewis's best special moves behind a cooldown, Drone and Minigun. Minigun is a long-range projectile that knocks opponents down at higher security level, which helps Gold Lewis stop setup characters and zoners alike, and Drone, as I've said once before, is an abomination. Drone is essentially just a free version of Potemkin's Gigantor Kai Super, being a moving, un-F-withable projectile that allows a free approach as long as Gold Lewis has the security for it. There are a select few moves that are able to destroy the drone, but as far as most things go, the only way to destroy it is to hit Gold Lewis, who is likely standing safely behind it waiting for you to drop. All of these powerful neutral skipping tools combined with his dominant offense is what allows for Gold Lewis to be as powerful as he is here in GGST. But I'd say if we want to look at what other heavyweights can do better design-wise, it's best to move along and look somewhere else. Sorry, not sorry, Gold Lewis players. That leaves us with just one true heavyweight to talk about, that being Bedman. And Bedman is actually one of Strive's examples of a failed heavyweight. So let's talk about why. The first interesting thing to note about Bedman is how his playstyle differs from other heavies. Instead of having a high offensive focus, Bedman is a little more rounded in his gameplay approach, mostly wanting to control neutral with his needle and electric projectiles until he can take advantage, making him not too dissimilar to a character like Jacko. Bedman does have powerful offense as expected, with his Fire Punch being core to his offense as a heavily delayable guard-crushing strike that always leaves him plus on block, meaning Bedman can really only ever be pushed away, not forced into minus frames to end his offense. Bedman also has his error mechanic, which stores a unique special move after each normal special move that activates automatically after a couple seconds if he isn't hit, which complements his offense and gives him more powerful screen control and lockdown tools. Finally, core to Bedman's movement is his 8-way air dash. Instead of having a double jump, Bedman can hover in place, then input any direction to dash there. Combined with his multi-hitting air attacks and respectable low reward, Bedman can apply scary mix-ups from the air. So that's the good. What's the bad? Well, first of all, despite being a heavyweight and having one of the biggest hurt boxes in the game, Bedman's life is much lower than the other big bodies. I suppose Arxis figured that because of Bedman's more rounded playstyle, giving him more health would run the risk of making him too frustrating to beat? I don't know, but what I do know is that Bedman is a character who takes similar risks to other heavyweights and doesn't have the life bar to back it up. If Bedman gets one of his incredibly stubby normals stuffed, or his fireball jumped over, he's going to take a lot more damage than if, say, Pot got clipped by a mid-range button. Additionally, while Bedman does have White Wild Assault, he doesn't really have any exceptional neutral skips to make up for his weaknesses in the mid-range as a result of being a heavy. As a matter of fact, his mid-range pokes tend to be shorter altogether compared to the other big bodies we've discussed, and Bedman lacks the ability to safely convert into a knockdown off of them, as his combo-ending tool and Spinning Top is punishable on block. His offense also relies much more on two-step than most other characters. Bedman needs to get a hit, get an error, lock you down again, and then force the error to pop before he gets going, which can be an extreme struggle against characters who have either good mash-outs, reversals, or mobility. A lot of this kind of leaves Bedman lost without a cause, and fairly weak as a result. Once he gets going, his offense is truly terrifying, I won't deny that. But it's hard for strong offense, a trait already typical of heavies, to make up for Bedman being a heavy with worse buttons than normal, worse conversions off of them than normal, and the typical weaknesses of a heavy on defense without the life bar to back it up. And as for traditional big body heavyweights, that's it for Strive. With the sad exception of Bedman, all of our big boys are on the upper end of the tier list for a few key reasons. To summarize, Nagoriyuki avoids the traditional weaknesses of a heavy by tying it to a resource, allowing him to have fast mobility and solid conversions if he spins his resource correctly. Potemkin has utility that is applicable at all stages of the game to help avoid him becoming too defined by his weaknesses, such as solid defensive bar A, checks on zoners, and DP safe offense. Gold Lewis hyper-focuses on a strike-oriented offense, guaranteeing him damage every turn he gets, and has numerous options to threaten an immediate skip to his turn that keep him a deadly threat. And Bedman attempts a more well-rounded, watered-down heavyweight playstyle, but ends up a little undertuned as a result. However, we still have a whole nother subset of characters to talk about, our mid-heavyweights. These characters uphold the power fantasy of playing a heavyweight and preserve the design principles, while also being a little more free in terms of mobility. And starting us off, we have perhaps the most notorious example of this design philosophy, Leo Whitefang. Leo functions as somewhat of a heavier version of Strive's take on the Shoto archetype, sacrificing mobility for HP and offense. Leo's dash is unique in that he cannot run, and his dash only travels a set distance. This restricts his long-range movement and can make his approaches relatively linear combined with his middling air presence, but this dash actually ends up benefiting Leo more than it hurts him. Because of its status as a step dash, the dash momentum early into its startup is higher than average. This means Leo has one of the strongest dash blocks in the game. When you're a character who wants to scrap up close and transition into offense as quick as possible, the ability to constantly threaten completely safe, swift movement directly into the opponent's face is extremely powerful, and it's not even close to the only thing he has going for him. Leo also has a powerful fireball that can be enhanced to use as an approach option should he get time to set it up. And while his buttons are short range and high recovery in theory, The game lets Leo cheat his way out of both of these things by using his dash momentum on short-range normals to significantly enhance their range, and through use of Leo's guard point stance, which cancels the recovery of his S and H normals into a mid-auto guard, from which Leo can counterattack an opponent trying to whiff punish him. Leo is different from the characters we've talked about so far in a key way on offense, and it's that he actually sacrifices high damage for powerful mix-ups. Leo's back turn is just as threatening as any other heavy's offense, just in different ways. First, Leo needs to be able to combo into it with either his flash kick or turbulence, at which point Leo can force a plus on block left-right, high-low mix through the use of a powerful stance that can cross up, attack low, overhead, parry, and poke with disjointed mids. Leo can't block during this stance, restricting its use to offense, but it puts in work and then some to make Leo just as scary as any other character we'll be talking about today. Leo succeeds in fulfilling the power fantasy of a heavyweight despite the smaller body by ruthlessly and relentlessly forcing his way into the opponent's face and then beating them into a pulp over and over again until the round is won. Anji Mito, on the other hand, takes a much different approach. If Leo is a ruthless, relentless opponent who creates pressure by chipping away at an opponent's defenses and tearing them apart, then Anji is a violent stalker, waiting patiently for his opponent to make a single mistake and destroying them in a blink of an eye. Anji is a bit faster than Leo, and has a normal run, but his attacks are short range and higher recovery than he'd probably like them to be, but this is more than made up for by Anji's defining character trait. Anji is a counter character, sporting a spin with variable release timings and follow-up attacks that counters all attacks, letting Anji perform a devastating punish that breaks the opponent's life bar into pieces. This creates a high amount of tension and fear into pressing any attack into Anji, as the instant he's activated that counter, the round could end before it even began. Anji's offensive pressure is actually the weakest out of the characters we've talked about, with his enders all being quite minus and it being more challenging for him to restagger his offense compared to others. But to say he's not scary to block would be a grave misunderstanding. Core to Anji's pressure is Fujin, a powerful Rekka with 4 follow-ups. These follow-ups allow Anji to pressure with a low, overhead, plus frame reset, and restagger. All the mix-up options here are definitely reactable in a vacuum, but when the mental stack is high, it's easy for Anji to get away with sneaky overheads and resets. A key part of making this style work is risk-reward, with all of Anji's enders being unsafe if responded to correctly, and Anji's counter being counter-hit recovery and unable to counter throws, a single misstep can spell his defeat. However, Anji excels in a way on offense that makes this much less of a problem, and that is his damage, specifically on normal hit. Any heavyweight can nuke you off a big counter hit, that's what they do, and Anji is no exception. Counter hitting with his 5H, close slash, or far slash practically spells the immediate end of the round, as it does for all big boys. But where Anji excels that they don't is on normal hit. Anji's 5H and Fujin grant him extremely powerful normal hit conversions that deal excellent damage, allow for Oki, and combo adjustments and extensions near the corner to increase that damage even more. Of course, Anji is also extremely healthy, sporting the highest guts value in the game, and his 2P is one of the game's strongest mash-out options, so despite having no meterless reversal, he works his way out of the enemy's pressure wonderfully. Anji's powerful screen presence due to his powerful counters and high-risk, high-reward offensive tools are what allow him to fulfill the power fantasy of a heavyweight while living in a not-so-heavyweight body. Next up, let's talk about GGST's newest character at the time of this recording, that being Abba. Honestly, I could have included Abba in the segment about true big body heavyweights, as she's actually one of the slowest movers in the game, and her giant ki makes up for her short stature and gives her a pretty large profile on the screen, but I decided to include her here instead. Abba is unique in that she is both the heaviest heavyweight in the game and the lightest lightweight in the game, with her Jealous Rage mode being the defining factor as to which playstyle she plays. Abba starts every game in normal mode, and has to work towards the reward of fast movement and offense by scrapping it out first. And, by design, Abba is incredibly weak in this normal mode, absolutely the weakest character in the game. First, her movement. It's slow. How slow? About that slow. She can choose from incredibly short-range attacks or incredibly laggy ones, and she lacks any neutral skips to speak of, such as White Wild Assault, Drone, or any of that nonsense. Her only really potent tools from a long range would be her exceptionally large 5H, a high-profile hop, and a low-profile slide. This means that despite Abba being the smallest character we've talked about so far, she plays the heaviest and most sluggish out of all of them. That being said, all of that changes once she installs. Abba's Jealous Rage is a powerful win condition that removes the term heavyweight straight from her dictionary. She gets the fastest dash in the game, an incredible jump arc, faster attacks, better mix-ups, better damage, and completely unmesswithable pressuring attacks. This juxtaposition between her normal and jealous mode is what creates the power fantasy of playing the character, feeling almost like a mirror version of Nagoriyuki, starting with no special moves and mobility, then slowly working towards a powerful state where you can just run your opponent over. And while Abba is definitely new to the game, this character design is proving to be quite powerful, as her jealous mode is strong enough to take entire rounds after just one activation, and Abba's normal mode has tools to at the very least tickle the opponent and let Abba build towards her install. Last on the chopping block is Johnny, and perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not, he takes a similar approach to Bedman. Johnny is much less about his crushing offense, although he is a very potent threat there, and is much more about his mid to long range pressure. Johnny has fast, long-range attacks and the sword-slashing Mistfinder to convert off of them, and the ability to set up cards to make said Mistfinder a plus-on-block guard crush that allows for combos on connect. This makes Johnny a bit closer to a traditional zoner than a character like Potemkin, but he certainly counts as a heavyweight for a few reasons. One, his life bar is huge, even bigger than Anji's. Second, and the main reason Johnny is a weak character, is his movement. Johnny is the only character with a true step dash. But wait, didn't I say Leo had a step dash too? Well, yes, but Johnny's is different in an infinitely worse way. Leo's can be interrupted into normals and blocking, letting him freely control himself after a dash. Johnny must fully commit to a dash, as during its entire startup, active, and recovery, Johnny cannot block or attack, and combined with his abysmal walk speed, Johnny almost has to play like a button-dispensing turret until he gets his chance to move. All of this is made up for with incredible strengths, however, as Johnny has solid damage conversions, 50-50 high-low mix-ups that can be made plus on block with a setup, neutral skips with meter, and his aforementioned extremely powerful neutral buttons and screen control. Sadly, this doesn't end up being enough to save Johnny. His offensive presence is definitely lower than the others we've discussed, and his terrible movement almost entirely negates the fact that his buttons are so great. That being said, he does fulfill the power fantasy of playing a heavyweight. Johnny has high health and fights like he knows he's better than you, with powerful normals that lead into solid combos, that lead into solid mix-ups, that lead into solid damage. So, now that we've talked about every character in the game, we should compare and contrast all their kits to see what design philosophies changed, what stays the same, what's strong, and what's weak. All of the characters we've talked about today have high health, lower mobility, and laggier buttons, and we've already discussed that the system changes in Guilty Gear Strive have made these weaknesses less of an issue. As far as strengths, these characters are all able to snowball victories very easily or win in just a couple of hits, something that is very strong in Strive due to the faster time to kill and increased burst recovery compared to older Guilty Gear games. Additionally, Strive makes up for the weakened neutral states of their heavyweights by giving them at least one alternate win condition in neutral that can be used to access their turn. Each of these secondary or even tertiary win conditions help give these characters flexibility and let them thrive in matchups their archetype generally assumes they suffer against. Looking at Pot for a quick example, you'd expect him to be completely hopeless against characters like Axel and Asuka due to their long-range attacks and powerful projectiles. Surprisingly, Pot has historically always had a fighting chance in these matchups due to his armored attacks, Slidehead being able to knock them out of their zoning patterns, the win condition of simply building 50 bar before he dies and using it to skip his approach, and Flick being able to reflect their projectiles. So, to summarize, I believe Strive's heavyweight success is a result of a few key things. 1. System changes. Stuff like screen shortening, Gatling reduction, and higher burst build all affect the heavyweight in a positive way. 2. Secondary win conditions. The ability to switch the approach from walking the opponent into the corner and beating them there in a matchup where this proves ineffective is a key component to the archetype's success in this game. And 3. Survivability. As mentioned, with burst and meter gain being higher than ever in Strive, heavy survivability becomes a bigger factor as they can restore more resources and use them to start new rounds with resource advantage or turn around previously hopeless ones after bursting, YRCing, or deflect shielding. These 3 factors contribute to the success of the archetype to the level we've seen it succeed in my opinion, and I'm interested to see if anything about this video's accuracy changes as patches get released. Due to the changing nature of a live competitive game, it's always possible one of these 3 pillars of heavyweight design will just get knocked down in an instant, and in the instance that happens, it'd at least be fun to reflect back on this video and see exactly how much has changed. For now though, that's all. This has been Adventure, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.